Welcome back, everyone. Before we dive in, make sure you drop your thoughts and the lessons you took from this story in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's get into it. My name is Janae Holt, and 2 nights before my wedding I stood outside Vivian Vaughn's study with my grandmother's velvet glasses case in my hands and learned that the man I loved had been planning my life like a quiet theft. I had gone back late on a Thursday because I could not sleep without those glasses on my nightstand. I found the case on the study table, picked it up, and then heard my own name through the door. Vivian said, "Marriage does not change ownership. Her signature does. After the wedding, when she relaxes, you slide in the account changes, the insurance paperwork, the amended operating agreement." Damon laughed and said, "She signs whatever I hand her if I tell her she is too busy for the details." Vivian answered, "Then keep her busy. A little at a time." Then Damon said, "I am not giving up the woman in Nashville." Vivian said, "You will not have to if you are smart." I stood there holding the last thing my grandmother had touched and felt my future turn sharp. I did not burst into the room. I did not give them the gift of watching me break. I stepped back, walked out, got into my car, and sat in the driveway until my breathing leveled out. On the drive home through Columbus, I understood 3 things. The wedding had to die, my company was the real target, and if Damon and Vivian had built a year-long plan around my trust, my first job was not to mourn. My first job was to become impossible to move. I did not cry on the highway. I thought about every form Damon had ever slid across a counter while kissing my forehead and calling it small. I thought about every dinner where Vivian had asked gentle questions about contracts, growth, and the dry legal pieces. Betrayal is supposed to feel like chaos. What it felt like to me was a project site after someone finds a hidden structural crack. Frightening, yes, but specific. And specific problems can be handled. By the time I got home, I was calm in the way that worries people who know me well. I set my grandmother's glasses on my nightstand, looked once at the wedding dress in the spare room, and texted Breland Price. She had been my best friend since 2nd grade and had grown into one of the sharpest business attorneys in Ohio. My message said, "I need you awake. Not about the wedding. Call me in 10 minutes and bring the version of you that wins." She called in 6. I told her everything exactly as I had heard it. When I finished, she asked one question. "Did you let them know you heard?" I said no. She exhaled and said, "Good. Their ignorance is now an asset." Then her voice changed from friend to counsel. "Do not confront him tonight. Do not cancel publicly yet. We find out what has already been done. We lock down what belongs to you. And then you end this with the ground under your feet instead of under theirs." That was when the night stopped being heartbreak and became work. I built Cardinal Crest Design build the same way I built every important part of my life. Carefully and without waiting for anyone's permission. I am 36. I grew up outside Columbus with my mother, Denise Holt, a high school math teacher who raised me on 2 rules. Learn how things work, and never let anyone tell you what you are worth. I studied civil engineering, then architecture, then spent 6 years at a large firm watching men present my work as if it had drifted into their hands by accident. I left before anger could rot into helplessness and started my own company with $11,000, a used truck, and a list of contractors who trusted me. The first project was an empty warehouse on the east side. I stood in that cold shell with a flashlight and saw a future where other people saw expense. For years later, Cardinal Crest had 30 employees, 2 owned properties, and a reputation for finishing on time. We had just been shortlisted for civic contracts that could change the whole company. Damon entered my life when success had made me powerful in public and lonely in private. We met at a fundraiser for a youth housing project my company had helped design. He worked in commercial real estate, knew enough about zoning to sound intelligent, and listened in the way overworked women often mistake for safety. He remembered details. He brought coffee exactly the way I liked it. He asked to see my first warehouse project, and one evening under temporary work lights, he got down on one knee there and proposed. I said yes because I thought that choice proved he understood me. What I know now is that attention can be tenderness or strategy. Damon learned my grandmother's name, my work rhythms, my blind spots, and the tone of voice that made me sign something without opening the second page. None of that happened by accident. He was not improvising love. He was designing access. The deepest cut was not that Damon fooled me. It was that I had defended him. Breland had never entirely trusted him, and my mother liked him with caution. About 8 months before the wedding, The three of us had dinner at my apartment while Damon had started helping with small administrative tasks because I was buried in bid deadlines and sleeping 4 hours a night. My mother asked why he was suddenly so interested in my paperwork. Breland asked whether he understood the difference between helping and inserting himself. I laughed and defended him immediately. I said he was the first man who had ever tried to lighten my load instead of adding to it. I said he respected what I had built. Damon reached under the table, squeezed my hand, and looked grateful to be trusted. Later that night he kissed my forehead and said, "Thank you for standing up for me." I told him, once I love someone, I am with them. That sentence came back to me on the drive home from Vivian's house and hurt more than anything else because I had meant it. Vivian knew how to turn warmth into architecture. By Thursday afternoon, 2 days before the Saturday wedding, she had spent more than a year becoming exactly the kind of future mother-in-law I thought I had been lucky enough to get. She invited me over for tea and called it a quiet hour before the weekend chaos. I brought peonies because she once told me they were her favorite. She praised the restored mill where the ceremony was supposed to happen. She told me Damon was fortunate. She said her late husband would have admired a woman who could build something real from the ground up. Then, with a lightness I did not notice at the time, she asked whether all the dry legal pieces were settled. The prenuptial agreement, the insurance, the account structures. I told her my attorney had handled everything and that I liked to keep my marriage and my business in separate rooms. Vivian smiled and said, "That is wise." I hear that sentence differently now. It was not approval. It was reconnaissance. I left my grandmother's glasses in the study because Vivian had taken me there to show me an old photograph of Damon's grandfather standing beside a half-finished brick building. I liked that picture. I liked the idea of marrying into a family of builders. After tea, I drove to the mill, checked linens, answered vendor calls, and went home too tired to think. When I reached for the glasses on my nightstand and found empty wood instead, panic hit fast and clean. Those glasses were the last thing my grandmother had worn. So I went back. That small decision saved me. If I had waited until morning, I would have been too late. If I had decided they were only glasses, I would have married Damon on Saturday and learned the truth over years instead of minutes. People talk as if lives change through dramatic instincts. Mine changed because I refused to sleep without one old object where it belonged. Love for the right dead woman saved me from the wrong living man. After Breland and I hung up, I wrote everything down while it was fresh. The exact phrases, the order of the conversation, the references to post-wedding paperwork, the amended operating agreement, the account additions, the insurance changes, the woman in Nashville. Then I started a second list. Everything Damon might already have touched. My business accounts, my personal banking, my life insurance, the deeds on my company properties, every form he had ever brought me while I was distracted, tired, or deep in a bid package. The shame in that moment was real. I am meticulous by nature. I save drafts. I keep receipts. I scan contracts. How, then, had I signed anything without reading every line? The answer mattered because I refused to tell the story as if I had become foolish. I had not made a habit of careless signing. I had made a series of exceptions for the man I was about to marry during the busiest season of my career. Damon had studied my exhaustion and wrapped his hands around it like opportunity. Around 1 a.m, I opened every folder I could access and started tracing patterns instead of panic. The first relief came fast. Cardinal Crest's business accounts were still in my sole control. Then I looked more closely and found a fourth account attached through my personal profile. It was a joint personal account with both my name and Damon's on it. The balance was small enough to be insulting. That told me what it was, not the prize, but the probe. I sat still until memory arrived. Last summer, while I was finishing a library bid before midnight, Damon had brought me a stack of bank forms and said they were just updates tied to our engagement. I signed where he pointed. Now there was the account to prove it. I pulled the transaction history and found 2 small transfers from one of my personal accounts, both labeled to look like routine fees. The amounts were trivial. The intent was not. He had tested whether money could move quietly enough that I would not notice. The second thing I found was a beneficiary change on my life insurance policy. Years earlier, I had named my mother. 8 months before, the beneficiary had quietly been changed to Damon. He had said we were updating everything after the engagement, and I had trusted the summary more than the packet because I trusted the man. The third thing was worse in a colder way. A few weeks before the wedding, Damon had borrowed my laptop to print revised seating charts because his printer was acting up. In a numeric downloads folder I almost never opened sat a draft amendment to Cardinal Crest's operating agreement prepared by a lawyer I did not know. It would have added Damon as a 30% member of the company. It was unsigned. It was unfiled. It was waiting. That was the moment the whole scheme became undeniable. They had not been dreaming aloud in Vivian's study. They had been discussing the next steps in a process already underway. The wedding was never the goal. The wedding was camouflage. Breland called again at 6 in the morning, and by then I had screenshots, notes, timestamps, and enough anger to power a city if anger were useful fuel. Friday gave us one full business day to lock down everything they intended to reach. Breland laid the plan out with the precision I needed. Marriage does not hand him your company, she said. Your signature does. That is why they needed you happy and tired after the wedding. They were going to slide him into your life first and into your documents second. She told me to cancel the venue walkthrough quietly, tell no one the truth yet, and spend the day putting hard barriers around every soft place Damon had learned to use. Then she said, do not let the size of the hurt decide the size of the response. You are not trying to make a scene. You are trying to keep what belongs to you. I needed steady more than sweet. At 9 that morning I was sitting across from a branch manager named Gloria Mercer with a red folder open between us. I did not tell her my heart was broken. I told her I believed a joint account had been opened through misrepresentation while I was distracted, that I wanted online access cut off immediately, that I wanted the account referred to fraud and compliance, and that I needed written restrictions placed on every Cardinal Crest business account so that no signer could ever be added without my in-person verification. Gloria asked clear questions, reviewed the account packet, and said, we can restrict movement today and escalate review. We cannot erase what exists, but we can make it very difficult to use. That was enough. From the bank, I went to my insurance agent and restored my mother as beneficiary. Then I met Breland, who filed a restated operating agreement reaffirming me as sole member, tightening the admission language, and voiding any prior and signed drafts. Before the day ended, she sent preservation letters to Damon and the lawyer who drafted the amendment. I was not starting a war. I was building a fence. Friday looked like competence. There were forms, notarizations, confirmations, scanned copies, calendar cancellations, password changes, and one half-eaten sandwich Breland forced me to consume because she knows I stop acting like a mammal under stress. Somewhere in the middle of all that, I asked her the question waiting under every document. Was I careless? She looked at me for a long moment before answering. No, she said. You trusted a man who built himself to fit your life. He learned your grandmother's name, proposed in the place that mattered most to you, carried small burdens, and made himself useful because useful gets mistaken for good. That is his fraud, not your failure. I believed her before I felt it, but it helped. By late afternoon, every critical door was closed. Damon could not reach my company, could not quietly move through my accounts, and could not later claim there had been no pattern. I confronted Damon on Saturday at noon, 4 hours before the ceremony that was no longer going to happen. The Vaughn house was full of white flowers and pointless optimism. A florist's van sat in the driveway. Vivian stood in a pale dressing gown directing people with the same polished warmth she wore like jewelry. Damon came out smiling and said, You are not supposed to see me today. Bad luck. I said, I need to speak with you and your mother. Inside. Now. In the front room, I stayed standing. I told him there would be no wedding. I told him I had already canceled the venue and would settle the vendor costs. Then I said, I came back Thursday night for my grandmother's glasses. I found them. Then I heard both of you discussing how to move me, my money, and my company a little at a time. The silence that followed had weight. Vivian's face went through concern, confusion, then offense, but none of them fit. Damon started to speak, and stopped when he saw that I was not there to hear a performance. I was there to close a door. I told them the joint account had been flagged and locked, the beneficiary had been changed back, and Cardinal Crest had been sealed in a way Damon's unsigned amendment would never touch. Damon asked whether I had gone through his things. I said, I went through mine. That was more than enough. Vivian tried to frame it as a misunderstanding of a private conversation. I said, private is not the same as innocent. Damon went gray then and looked, for the first time, like what he actually was, a man who had confused access with entitlement. Then he said, some of it was real. I did love you. I turned fully toward him. That is the saddest thing you could have said, I told him, because if some of it was real, then you knew exactly what you were destroying while you were doing it. You did not just lose access to money. You lost the woman who would have protected your name, built a home with you, trusted you in public and private, and stood beside you for the rest of your life. You lost respect. You lost safety. You lost a future you were too lazy to build honestly. That was when it finally landed on both of them in the only language they respected: loss. Vivian looked at me with something colder than shame and more frightened than anger. Damon looked as if he had been knocked slightly sideways by a force he had not expected to be real. Vivian said quietly, "You will regret this." I said, "No. What I will regret is how close I came to marrying into this family." Then I walked out past the flowers and candles and the ridiculous evidence of a celebration built on theft. In the car, I called the planner and confirmed the cancellation. Then I called my mother. Denise did not ask for details first. She asked where I was, whether I was alone, and whether I needed her at my apartment or my office. She came to my apartment with groceries and controlled fury and went straight to my kitchen because practical movement is how women in my family keep from drowning. Breland arrived later with final documents and tea we barely touched. Together we called every vendor and closed every loop. By nightfall the dress still hung in the spare room, untouched. Monday morning I gathered my leadership team at Cardinal Crest and told them exactly what they needed to know and not one private detail more. I said my engagement had ended. I said I was safe. I said I had spent the weekend making sure no one close to me could ever again stand near the financial controls of the company. Then I told them the part that mattered most. This place supports 30 families, I said. I nearly allowed my private trust to create public risk. That will not happen again. There will be stronger review procedures on any banking or legal change. If I ask caution from all of you, I owe honesty from me. The room stayed quiet for a beat. Then Tony Lewis, my office manager since the warehouse days, stood up and said, "We are sorry you were hurt, and we are glad you protected this place." That simple sentence nearly undid me. I looked at the ceiling for a moment and kept talking until my voice settled again. That was the first time I let myself shake. In front of the people whose paychecks depended on my judgment. Somehow that felt right. Breland brought in a forensic accountant named Calvin Marsh 3 days later. He was quiet, exact, and respectful of documents in a way I immediately trusted. I gave him everything: screenshots, account records, file metadata, my notes from Thursday night, the preservation letters, the insurance paperwork, all of it. Over the next 3 weeks, he traced the pattern more cleanly than I could in the first raw days. The joint account had been used twice to test whether money could move quietly. The lawyer who drafted the ownership amendment had an old professional connection to Vivian. Damon's increased involvement in my small administrative burdens lined up neatly with the period when Cardinal Crest was pushing hardest toward the civic contracts. Calvin's report did not overstate anything, which is one reason I trusted it. He said, "On their own, these are messy acts. Together, in sequence, with the conversation you overheard and documented the same night, they tell a very clear story." He was right. The report did not feel like revenge. It felt like a wall built out of boring truth. I told Calvin I did not want a loud lawsuit if I could avoid one. He nodded as if that answer fit me exactly. "Most careful people are not actually interested in revenge," he said. "They are interested in making the danger legible." Breland used the report that way. When Damon's lawyer sent a cautious inquiry implying that my cancellation had caused reputational damage, Breland answered with facts, dates, and attachments. She did not threaten. She simply identified the joint account, the beneficiary change, the unauthorized draft amendment, and the preservation obligations already in place. The inquiry died immediately. The report then did what good paper does in a professional city. It tightened conversations. When Damon's name came up in a development context, people asked more questions. When the drafting lawyer's name appeared in another matter, people read more closely than before. Truth does not need to be theatrical to move. It only needs to survive repetition. That report could survive anything because it was built the same way I build a sound structure. On sequence, documentation, and clean lines that hold under pressure. Damon's first real consequence arrived through his own profession. He had been courting a partnership role on a mixed-use redevelopment outside Cincinnati, the kind of deal he mentioned often enough that even I knew he thought it would finally make him look like more than a charming middleman. About 6 weeks after the wedding fell apart, I heard through a contractor that the developer had gone in a different direction. Later I learned why. Damon had tried to explain the broken engagement as me getting overwhelmed and unstable under work pressure. That version held only until one lender asked the obvious question. Why had an experienced business owner with newly finalized civic contracts immediately tightened every safeguard around herself after calling off the wedding? The answer that followed was apparently not the one Damon had hoped to give. The developer moved on. I did not celebrate that when I heard it. I sat in my office and let it settle because it mattered precisely for being concrete. Not rumor. Not fantasy. A lost deal. He had built his career on charm, and charm does not survive due diligence as well as competence does. Vivian's consequence came in the social world she valued most. She sat on the executive committee of an arts foundation and moved through one of those polished Columbus circles where reputations are traded as carefully as donor lists. After the cancellation, she tried to shape the story. She hinted that I had panicked, that work had made me cold, that I had become unstable under pressure. That line might have held if I had disappeared. Instead, I remained public, busy, and calm. I attended city meetings. I presented revisions. I spoke at a community forum about one of our library projects with steady hands and a clear voice. Meanwhile, someone in her foundation circle heard enough accurate information to know there had been an attempted financial entanglement involving a future daughter-in-law's company. A month later, Vivian was rotated off the executive committee ahead of schedule. Nobody called it punishment. They called it timing. They called it transition. But I know exclusion when I see it. Vivian had wanted the status of attaching her family name to mine. Instead, she attached herself to a story she could not outdress or explain away. The woman in Nashville never became part of my life beyond the sentence I overheard in the hallway. I learned eventually that Damon had been promising her a future built on money and convenience he assumed he would secure through me. Once I walked out before the wedding and Breland sealed every door he intended to use, that fantasy collapsed too. She left him. That was enough information for me. I did not call her. I did not ask for proof or alliance. She was not my enemy. Damon and Vivian were. There is a type of strength that looks like gathering everybody into one dramatic scene, but that was never my style. My style is cleaner than that. I removed the rotten beam and let gravity do the rest. If the affair failed because the money story under it failed, that seemed fitting. Even his disloyalty had depended on my labor. That fact cured me of any lingering softness. He had not only planned to use me as a wife. He had planned to use me as infrastructure. My mother stayed with me for almost 2 weeks, and one night after dinner, I finally said the thing that had been living under all the paperwork. I think I was lonelier than I admitted, I told her. I think that is how he got in so deep. Denise turned off the sink, dried her hands, and sat across from me at the table where the transit hub drawings were spread out. You were not lonely because something was wrong with you, she said. You were lonely because you were carrying a hard life and doing it well enough that people assumed you needed nobody. There is a difference. I told her Damon had found the exact place in me that wanted someone waiting at the end of long days and built himself to fit it. She nodded. Yes, that is what predators do. They study hunger. But hunger is not shameful, Janae. Wanting partnership is not weakness. Then she covered my hand with hers and said, What I am proudest of is not that you found out. It is that once you found out, you did not let your hunger talk you into swallowing poison because it had already reached your mouth. That sentence did more healing than any reassurance I had received. I kept every record. For months later, Vivian mailed me a 2-page handwritten letter on cream stationery. It began with Dear Janae and tried line by line to rename reality. She said a mother only wants security for her son. She said private concerns had been taken out of context. She said there had still been genuine affection and therefore room for repair. I read it once with a pencil in my hand. Then I put it in the fireproof box with the operating agreement, the account records, Calvin's report, and my grandmother's glasses when I was not wearing them. I did not reply. A person trying to rewrite the past rarely deserves argument. They deserve storage. Around that same time, Breland and I rebuilt every access point in my life. No account could open in my name without my physical presence. No legal document related to Cardinal Crest moved without internal review. I changed passwords, locks, permissions, cloud access, and emergency contacts. Caution can look extreme to people who have never been studied. To me, it felt like restoring oxygen. Once the immediate danger passed, I had to decide what kind of woman I was going to become afterward. Hardness had a certain appeal. It looked efficient. It looked like safety. But hardness taxes good things along with bad ones. And I did not want Damon stealing from me years after he was gone by teaching me to distrust everyone. Breland caught that risk before I fully named it. One afternoon I snapped at Tony over a vendor packet she had handled correctly, and Breland said, "Do not turn everybody into him. That is how he keeps taking." She was right. So instead of growing hard, I grew precise. I built procedures. I hired a contract administrator so that legitimate help would no longer arrive disguised as romance. I paused before signing even the smallest page. I let trusted people check what I could not check alone. That distinction changed everything. I could accept help without confusing help for love. Survival is not only escaping a trap. It is refusing to rebuild the conditions that made the trap look reasonable. By the time summer settled in, Cardinal Crest had moved fully from defense back into growth. The civic contracts finalized. We secured the transit hub, 2 library renovations, and a community center build. I reviewed every line personally, not because fear had made me obsessive, but because respect had made me thorough again. That difference matters. Fear narrows your life. Respect clarifies it. Tony joked that I had gone from carrying 10 things badly in my head to making sure 10 people each carried one thing well. She was right. The day we finalized the transit hub contract, I sat alone in my office after everyone left and thought about how close I had come to letting Damon stand beside me in the photographs, smiling the smile I now knew by type. He had wanted attachment to my future without earning it. Instead, my future moved ahead with clean paper, capable people, and my name exactly where it belonged. That realization gave me more satisfaction than public humiliation ever could have. Nothing punishes a would-be thief like being locked outside while the house keeps expanding. A year and a half later, the city broke ground on the Central Transit Hub, the largest project Cardinal Crest had ever touched. The morning was bright. My mother sat in the first row in blue. Breland sat beside her in green, already pretending she was not emotional. Tony and half my team filled the chairs behind them. Calvin stood near the back looking exactly like a man who prefers his work to disappear once it holds. I wore a tailored suit the color of deep red wine, the shade my mother had always called my courtroom color. When my turn came, I set down the index card I had brought and looked at the cleared lot near the river. Then I said, "I started this company with $11,000 and a flashlight in a warehouse most people thought should be torn down. I have learned that the difference between collapse and endurance is usually not force. It is attention. It is the willingness to look closely before a crack becomes a failure." The crowd quieted, so I told a little more truth. Not long ago, people looked at what I built and decided it would be easier to take it than to build something of their own. They were patient. They were careful. They made one mistake. They believed I would not notice. I did not name Damon or Vivian. I did not need to. I touched the side of my bag where the velvet case rested and said, "People who build for a living notice the small thing that can bring a whole structure down if ignored." My grandmother taught me that lesson with a cardinal in her yard. This company is named for that bird. Bright things should not apologize for being visible, and what belongs to you should never be surrendered because someone smiled when they asked for it. Then I picked up one of the ceremonial shovels and turned the dirt. Afterward, my mother held my face in both hands and said, "You did it." I smiled and said, "We did it." She shook her head. "No. I helped. Breland helped. Your team helped. Calvin helped. But you went back for the glasses. You read every line. You did it." That evening I took the glasses out of the fireproof box and set them on my nightstand where they belonged. I stood at the window, looked out over Columbus, and understood that this was the real ending. My company protected. My name intact. My life still fully mine. The ending did not happen the moment I canceled the wedding. It happened later, with dirt on a ceremonial shovel and my mother's hand warm on my cheek. It happened when I understood what Damon and Vivian had really lost. Not just access to money or proximity to public contracts. They had lost the chance to be loved by a woman who would have built honestly with them. They had lost the shelter of my loyalty, the dignity of my respect, and the future security of being attached to something real. Those are losses money cannot replace, which is why I know they felt them. As for me, I gained something I would not have chosen to learn, but would never surrender now that I know it. I learned that trust is not weakness. It is a resource, and like every resource, it must be placed where it can grow instead of where it will be stripped. On the night I went back for my grandmother's glasses, I thought I was rescuing one small object. What I was really rescuing was the rest of my life. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and share this video with your friends. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a powerful story drop.